right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are. So we're going to have a chat today with someone who I think has an interesting story. We'll find out. We're talking with Eoin Flinn. We're going to be talking about ostensibly about the Kenyan beer scene, but mainly about how a man from Limerick ended up owning a brewery in Kenya. So I guess the first thing, Owen, is did you go to Kenya with the intention of setting up a brewery, or did you end up in Kenya and then set up the brewery? I suppose that's the main question.
The latter. I was here for 5 or 6 years before we started a brewery, so I have no excuse. I should have known what a bad idea it was, but I did it anyway.
Well, that's not a good start. What a bad idea it is. So how did you end up there? I suppose it's the thing, like you're from Limerick or just outside Limerick. So how did you?
I left Ireland in 2004 and to go and travel around the world. I met my wife on my travels, and we lived in New York for a while, and then we lived in China, and then we ended up in Kenya for a company called Burn, which makes energy efficient charcoal stoves. And so in China we were in manufacturing, and here we were manufacturing. My background really has always been manufacturing things, and we kind of came to the conclusion that Africa was really lacking in manufacturing, and Africa has all of the raw materials in the world, and they all get exported to other places, and the value add happens there, and then we pay triple to get anything back in, and finished goods back into the continent. So we kind of became manufacturing evangelists, and so the brewery is technically the 4th company we started here with my wife and I. So
okay. So first I'll just say we have a few people watching, I can see, so do drop your name in or say hi, or if you have any questions, do drop them in there and we'll get to them. So after all those travels, you definitely didn't want to come back to Ireland,
though. So my mother's in the chat. Obviously, she's got you already, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm the oldest of 7, and 5 years ago we lived in 7 different countries, and now 6 of them are back in Ireland, and I'm the last one who is not returned. So the weather it makes it hard, I think. Definitely. We're very settled here. We lived here for 11 years. Our kids born here and in school and everything. Try to get back once a year. We'll have to see. But if we do go bankrupt, then that's the fallback plan. Yeah.
You're a very positive person here with the bad ideas and the bankruptcy. So Kenya was, and that's home now. And what were the other businesses that you set up then that kind of led to the brewing, I suppose?
So we were in making these energy efficient cook stoves, and in this kind of space they call social enterprise. So like solar companies, microfinance, clean cook stoves, and all of this stuff. And we were very kind of excited about that whole thing. And my wife worked for a solar company, and I was working for Burn. And we just decided after 4 or 5 years that we wanted to still be in manufacturing, but we wanted to move away from the social enterprise space, which is funded by a lot of grants, and that kind of dictates the nature of the business. And we wanted to just kind of get into pure business, and we wanted to keep on manufacturing things. So we started just looking at what kind of products we as consumers in Nairobi wanted that weren't in the market. And so I originally started making kombucha. So we ended up spinning a kombucha brand out of the kitchen here, and that's still going. And then my wife, when we had our first child, she became really switched on to this whole thing of non-toxic cleaning products and getting the kind of chemicals in cleaning products out of your home, especially when you have young children around. So she started making those at home, and then we kind of spun that into a brand. And then we thought, okay, kombucha and non-toxic cleaning products, this is going to be kind of a slow burn in Kenya. So what's a really easy way to make money? Beer, definitely. We both drink a lot of beer, so we just kind of started making beer. We met these two American brothers called Aram and Isaac, who were home brewers, and we kind of just just started a new company with them and called it 254, and then they ended up going back to the States, and then we hired an amazing brewmaster from America called Matt Walsh, who had been the head brewer of a few big breweries big craft breweries in America, Modern Times in San Diego, Lost Coast up in Northern California, and a few others, Speakeasy Ales in San Francisco. And so he came out in the middle of COVID, and he kind of helped take us up to the next level. And then he moved on, and then we got a German brewmaster who we have now. And the whole time we've had a really awesome team of Kenyan brewers working under the different kind of brewmasters. So the idea is that now the next stage will be for them to just, be independent, and that they are the brewmasters basically. Right.
So is there much of a is there a lot of home brewing going on in Kenya that, or is it that you had to bring these people in because the people weren't even familiar with home brewing, or is it just with the technicalities of kind of a larger brewing done?
Well, certainly not home brewing barley-based beers. Okay. So there's like about 50 traditional beers in Kenya. Some are honey wines. There's palm wine on the coast made from coconuts. And there's various things made of millet, bananas. So there is home brewing. But in terms of making lagers and IPAs, not so much. There have been two companies on the market from when we arrived, like in 2012. One's called Big Five Breweries, and the other one's called Sierra. So they've been around for ages. They were more so brew pubs, whereas we were coming at it from more of the perspective of making a packaged product and putting it out into supermarkets and bars and stuff like that. But then we've ended up starting a couple of brew pubs as well.
Okay. So yeah, so just to come on you mentioned there the traditional beers. You're not going, if I look right, you're very deliberately not going down the traditional route. You're going with the barley, the malted barley, kind of Europe.
Well, we wouldn't know how, but we so for example, we have a beer. It's actually our most popular beer with our Kenyan beer drinkers, which is called Marotta Two, and it's a Belgian triple. Okay. And in Kikuyu, the area where we brew the traditional Kikuyu beer is called Muratina. And so Marotta Two is it's a Belgian triple. So in Swahili, triple to say times three is Marotta Two. And then the Muratina inspired kind of nature of it, we call it Marotta Two. So it's a Belgian triple. It's, it doesn't have any honey or anything in it, but it has a similar flavor profile and a similar alcohol strength to the traditional honey wine Muratina. And so that beer then ends up resonating more with Kikuyu drinkers. So we're kind of, beer agnostic. We started off making IPAs because there was none in the market. The two that I mentioned didn't really have any IPAs, certainly no real kind of West Coast, super hoppy IPAs. And that was what we were kind of really excited to make. And then we started making lagers, and then we started making just everything. And we still make a new beer every week. And we just put that out in the bar and then see what people like. If people like it, we make more of it. And when we made the Belgian triple, it basically sold out in a weekend. So we just kept making more of it and developing it into a brand. So, we're not, we might start making traditional beers one day, but we don't actually know that much about it. So we need to kind of go to school first.
Right. So that's probably where you're having your American and German brewmasters. They're bringing what they know, and then
the Americans definitely for the IPAs, and then the German, now we're not letting him touch the IPAs, but his lager skills are very good. So
right. So then once you have the other brewers trained up and like once they take over, that's probably when you'll maybe start introducing.
Yeah, well, they do recipe development already, and they do everything. They do all of the work. So the main thing that we're just focused on now really is getting the controls and documentation really, really tight, and that's probably the last area where we're a little bit loose with the guys. So that's mostly what we're kind of focused on now before we go, independent.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, like, when you went down the route of picking those type of beers, was it because there was nothing else in the market like it that it gave you gave you an advantage, or at least a differentiating point, or is it just happen chance?
Yeah, it was just, we hadn't really seen any IPAs in the market or any kind of like craft beers in the way that we had seen them back in Ireland at that stage. Because like when I left Ireland, there was no craft beer. And then, you're coming home and the supermarket is like over half of its craft beer. So I think we just kind of assumed this was going to take over the world anyways. And why, we'll just get ahead of the curve,
So I think I saw in an interview you're doing are you doing a nitro stout as well?
We do make a nitro stout, and it's amazing. It's it's funny that a lot of people don't know that Guinness is a nitro stout, and sometimes people think that we're trying to be hipsters and stuff by making nitro stout, but we're just trying to make a pint,
something familiar.
Yeah, it's really good, and there's certainly been nothing like that anywhere near Nairobi, since we've been out here. So you can't beat like watching the rugby and drinking a nitro stout in the bar in Western.
Yeah, except then you're missing the rain.
We get plenty of rain, but we get all the rain out of its system in one go. We don't like drip feed it,
Okay. Well, no, that is a difference, I suppose. So so sorry. So I thought that Guinness was very big around Africa generally.
It is, but it's a carbonated stout. It's not on draft at all. It's it's very fizzy, and the head kind of looks like a kind of like a lager head, if you know what I mean. As in the bubbles are foamy and they dissipate quickly. And it's stronger as well. It's 6.5% here.
Okay.
So
yeah,
it's called Guinness Foreign Export. It's a different thing to what we have at home.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how they keep they keep the Guinness brand, but they seem to have multiple different variations around the world, and nobody seems to know what they're drinking. Because
maybe that's why they never brought it out here, because it might confuse people. Because the most what everyone's familiar with is a strong stout that comes in a can. So
okay. So so let's go back then. So what is the beer scene in Kenya generally? Like, is it among any particular groups? Is it among kind of expats, or is there a different thing again among locals? Is there the traditional influences?
No, Kenyans love their beer, but there is a big monopoly on beer with Diageo. So Diageo owns East Africa breweries, and they control 94% of the beer market. So the two main brands are called Tusker and Whitecap, and they're kind of like you get them for like $2 a can in the supermarket, and like $4 or euros in bars. Which would be like quite expensive for the majority, like for 80% of Kenyans. And so the biggest So the biggest part of the cost in beer is tax. The tax on beer, the excise duty on beer in Kenya is 142 shillings, so like over €1 per liter, and that's just the excise tax. So in order to make beer affordable for the majority of the population, Diageo and the Kenyan government created a draft beer called Senator Keg, which is exempt, or it's 90% exempt from the excise duty, and so it's that is the biggest beer on the market. But to be honest, most people in Nairobi don't even know that it exists. But outside of Nairobi, local bars would all have draft beer serving Senator Keg, which is a sorghum beer. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So it seems to be like it's two different markets. It's the Nairobi and the rest of Kenya.
Well, Nairobi, and then there's Mombasa and Kisumu, and I mean there's middle class populations, in like 40 cities around Kenya. Nairobi's definitely the major metropolis, but then there's just a huge portion of the population that are living in a much lower income bracket. So,
and is that the fact that it's controlled by Diageo, is that why you had to go and set up a brew pub then in the end, even though it wasn't your initial idea?
Why about Diageo?
I'm wondering, because they control all the distribution, did you just have to set up the brew pub for
Did I feel that I needed to be rebellious and make an alternative? I suppose there must have been some element of that. It wasn't really I didn't actually even really realize, how kind of strong the company really was here. I mean, they've had a monopoly for 100 years. I don't know when Diageo bought them. Maybe it was 20 years ago or something like that. But they're very, very competitive. The South Africans tried to get into Kenya. There's a 10-year period called the Beer Wars, where SAB Miller, and that's now AB InBev, the big brewery in South Africa, tried to make headways into Kenya and left 10 years later with their tail between their legs. And Carlsberg pulled out last year. Heineken are still here, but they're very, very embedded everywhere. 94%. So vast majority of bars are very financially entangled with the ABL, which I didn't realize when I was getting into it. So I've probably become more rebellious as it's gone on, because I've always been a consumer of Tusker and Whitecap. I wasn't really a beer snob. That was what I drank all the time. But as you kind of see the way they operate in the market, I think it is quite anti-competitive, and I suppose that probably makes me want to poke the bear a little bit, but only so much, because they might murder me in my sleep. But we have, there's so many Irish connections with Diageo. We have lots of friends that work for Diageo, friends that work for ABL. They come to the bar. We sell in the bar in Westlands. We sell all the Diageo spirits, so we still hope that they'll buy us one day. So I'm not really that rebellious,
So if anybody's watching, this is the flag. This is the sales pitch.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll just go back to your beers there, because we just had a comment here. So from Josephine, just wondering, out of all your beers, which is your favorite?
Well, I was just about to ask Brian if you usually crack a beer on the podcast, but
I do, but I actually didn't have one with me, so I kind of forgot.
I brought a couple of beers here. So this is my favorite, is the Session IPA. So our big selling IPA is 7%, and this one is called Golden Rump. Where's my camera?
Okay, yeah, we can see it
backwards. Yeah. So that's what I'm having now. It's in my old age, I've moved down in the ABV. So I used to drink the 7% IPA, and now it just kills me. So I'm a big fan of this.
Right. Yeah, I found the same lately. It's you want to be able to drink a couple, because like you don't want to be drinking imperial stouts all night because you won't last, and then I can't handle the hangovers the next morning anymore.
No, and then our big selling beers is 10% triple. So I mean, you can imagine, there's every bar we sell in has a Marotta Two story, you know.
Okay, so yeah, let's just start there. Your distribution, you mentioned every bar you sell in. So are you selling in? You're selling in your own bars. Are you selling to other bars on draft, or is it on?
Yeah, we're in about 100 bars in Nairobi, maybe 130, something like that. And about 10 of them are draft, but those would all be our big sellers. We sell about 80% of our beer in the top 20 bars, you know. So, and a lot of them are draft. It's quite hard to control draft beer in Kenya. I think in Africa in general, it's nowhere near as common as it would be back home, where it's obviously the default way to serve beer in trade. Here would be, 99% bottles, and then you would have seen the odd Heineken on draft. Maybe Tusker started bringing out draft a few years ago, which is ironic, right? And then, as I was saying, the cheap beer for the mass market is all draft, Senator Keg, and it's actually part of the legal conditions for that it's but tap systems into bar. Obviously, then we have to put in the tap systems in the bars, and you can't just sell kegs, so there's a bit more of a capex component to it, and we found it very difficult with the gas. The other thing that I learned the hard way is that, like, when you're in Ireland and you get gas, for the bar, for the taps, it's a blend of CO2 and nitrogen, and we can't get that blend here. Apparently, it's I don't know. Don't ask me why you can't get it, but you can't get it, and it costs a lot of money to get a machine that can actually blend them in a stable manner. So we're using pure CO2, which will then absorb into the beer over time, and the beer will get foamier. So we've ended up having to develop a whole protocol of decompressing the kegs every night. The bartenders have a whole kind of system that they follow so that the beer doesn't end up getting overcarbonated after a couple of days. And our beer is also unpasteurized and unfiltered, so it needs to be kept cold all the time. So if you leave it in at cold temperatures under pressure, it will absorb the CO2 quite quickly.
So that the temperature then, I guess, is also, like you said, apart from that, I mean, temperature just on keeping your beers fresh, especially IPAs and that. Is that a big problem, or does everybody have cooling systems? Just even for bottles.
Even with the bottles, we almost always have to put in a fridge. It's not that they don't have a fridge. It's that the only fridge they have is a Diageo EABL fridge, and they got that fridge with a contract that might allow them to use 10% of the fridge for non-EABL products. However, when your beers are in that fridge, they might end up getting pushed to the back of the bottom shelf that's behind the branding, and completely invisible, to everybody. So you end up putting in your own fridges. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it sounds an awful lot like the controlled beers have in Ireland. I actually remember that happened some time back, but it wasn't about beer, if I remember correctly. They used to have the big problem in Ireland with ice creams, didn't they? They were all branded and people couldn't put in their own ice creams. And then there was a big thing about that years ago.
Well, it is like that here. We just got Häagen-Dazs, and even Ben & Jerry's in the last few years have come in, but it's always in their own freezer. Yeah. It's branded Ben & Jerry's, and you wouldn't see any other ice cream in there. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's not the sort of thing, if you're outside the tray, that you think like, you think a fridge is a fridge and that's it. You can put whatever, but you never think about how it's used, or it's the same as the taps or signage or whatever they're providing. There's always a catch on the whole thing. So we'll just stay on your beer here because Josephine has another question. She wants to know what's your best seller.
Good question, Josephine. We are so overall across our own bars and the supermarkets and trade in Nairobi, Sandtrap, the IPA, is still our top seller. Niaje, the lager, comes in number 2, and Marotta Two comes in number 3. But in Kikuyu in the brewery, it goes Marotta Two, Marotta Two, Marotta Two, then Sandtrap. Pretty much the more expat the clientele gets, the more it shifts to the IPA. The more Kenyan it gets, the more it shifts towards the Belgian triple, and then everybody's drinking lager. So lager, it's kind of across the board.
Right. Yeah, and okay, I think you've answered my question there, was if there was a split between different types of people or different groups on the beer that they like. So do you have to, like, if you're in all these bars, are you also in shops and things like that, supermarkets?
Yeah, we're in like all the major supermarkets. Carrefour is the big supermarket here, and then the 2 local brands that we're in are called Chandarana and Nivus. Not in every branch around the country, but all of the Nairobi branches, and then some of the upcountry branches, as we call them.
And I'm wondering how you're marketing this. Are you putting a lot into marketing in there, or are you just getting it on, and because you're one of the few that are outside, that aren't the Diageo ones, that people give you a try, or do you have to spend a lot of time marketing? Or
well, good question. We mostly only focus on Nairobi, and then our sales outside of Nairobi are just mostly where there's already a latent demand. So at the coast, the Kenyan coast, we have a bit of demand there, and then a few of the kind of the other B cities around Kenya, there's a bit of demand there. So we don't really, probably in terms of the craft beer market across Kenya, 80 to 90% of that market would be in Nairobi. So, and the beer has to be transported cold, which is also a challenge. So all of our marketing efforts are on Nairobi for sure. Yeah.
What's the population of Nairobi? I should have asked you this. Just get an idea of the market size.
I think it's between 4 and 5 million. It was always 3 to 4 when we came, and I think people say 4 to 5 now. It's 4 in my head, but it's around that. Yeah.
Okay, so it's substantial. I mean, that there's enough there that if it's a big enough city that you don't have to worry about all the hassle of trying to fight Diageo out in the countryside.
No, you wouldn't win that battle out there. No.
Right. So where, like you mentioned, tax as well. Tax sounded, if I understood right, a big problem there. But
I think globally there's a recession going on, and Kenya definitely there is. The Kenyan shilling's been sliding a lot for the last year. We had elections last year. The economy always kind of freaks out a little bit when there's elections. The international community tends to freak out a little bit. So we got through the elections quite peacefully, relatively speaking. And so there's a new administration in power. It just remains to be seen how they handle it, basically. But it's a tough, everyone's getting squeezed. The Kenyan shilling's getting weaker. We're making beer with German malt and American hops. Costs are all in euros and dollars. So they've all gone up. The tax just keeps going up, just when it was 100 when I started, now it's 142. The finance bill's coming next month. We're dreading what they're going to do because it's already so high. I don't know what it is in Ireland, actually. But I always reference America because the tax, the 142, the $1.10 per liter here, if I convert it to gallons and look at the federal tax in America, it's about 40 times higher here, the tax that we have. So I know that only Finland in Europe has a higher tax on beer than Kenya does, and the purchasing power in Kenya is not what it is in Finland. So we're actually trying to lobby with the government as kind of challenging on a long-term as problem as that is, but per unit of alcohol, spirits, beer is taxed at 3.5 times higher of a rate than spirits in Kenya. So I think it's a thing where the government, it became, and like Diageo is the highest taxpayer in Kenya. EABL is the highest taxpayer in Kenya. And I don't know how many countries the highest taxpayer would be a beer producer. So it has become, the beer was treated as a tax over the last 50, 60 years. And it was always just a very, beer today in a bar is 400 shillings. In like 1995, it was like 6 shillings, So for Kenyans, it's been a massive change over the years. Yeah, there's been inflation and stuff like that, but mostly it's just been, beer is kind of treated as an easy way to tax. I suppose like cigarettes or like everything.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, it doesn't sound like it's any part of a kind of an anti-alcohol, platform. It's just purely about getting money.
Well, the current administration is very anti-alcohol, funnily enough. And that's a bit of a new thing, and they're very Christian. And I always try and explain to people here, like the Irish played a big role in bringing Christianity to Kenya, and we're all alcoholics, especially the priests. So something got really lost in translation there. But Christianity in Kenya is highly correlated with teetotaling and the alcohol kind of being blamed for all of society's problems. But the reality of what's happening is that the high tax on beers like lager, craft beer, or whatever, is just pushing people to cheaper spirits. The country is flooded with knockoff spirits. Over 50% of the spirits in Kenya are outside of the tax bracket. They don't pay any tax at all. So, if the government would take a long-term view, we think it's actually a slam dunk argument. But at the moment, the government's taking a very short-term view, which is that we need to get more revenue in the coffers. The goal, the mandate that the president gave to the Kenya Revenue Authority when he came in was double the tax revenue. Like we need to go from 2 to 4. Like we need double the amount of money in the door. So nothing's going down, but because of also the rising costs, it's just you're definitely stuck between a rock and a hard place. But then you look at also maybe getting more into making traditional beers and not importing your raw ingredients and stuff like that. So
yeah,
we just have to deal with the cards as we're dealt them, basically.
What's their position on kind of, on supporting export? Or is there any chance at all that you export?
With the non-toxic cleaning products, that's my wife's main business, is that we see that as a big export play. And, I think as much as we have been really diehard on manufacturing, we're very, I think that you can see now, the more you get into it, like you need to be manufacturing for export as well. Whereas we've always been kind of focused on like developing domestic brands. The beer doesn't really travel well. It needs to be kept cold all the time. It's not really set up for transport. We're exporting. We export about a pallet a month at the moment to Rwanda. Randomly, just kind of a thing just came about, and we have thought about regional export a little bit more. I think in the coming years, one of the goals would be to make a more shelf stable beer that didn't need to be refrigerated all the time, and put it in cans and sell small volumes to capital cities around East Africa, pretty much.
And would there be support for that from the government, do you think, or is it just something you have to do? So you have to
Well, that excise duty, funny enough, you don't when you export, you don't pay any excise duty, so that's good. But then Rwanda has a 60% import duty on the beer, so it nets out basically. We haven't looked at all the other markets. I'm sure we could get at least a few cases up to Ireland. Now that I think about it, that just dropping the excise would cover the shipping costs for sure. How much is the import duty on beer in Ireland?
I couldn't tell you what the import is, but I couldn't tell you what it would be from Kenya. Not a clue.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're not
probably less than your excise though, from the sound of it.
I think it's definitely less than excise. Hopefully, it's less than 60%. So,
yeah, I mean,
but yeah, like, why would we be exporting IPAs and lagers to Europe and America? You know, it wouldn't really be on the radar. But I do think that there's so much interesting stuff going on. There's so many interesting different kinds of grains and botanicals and yeasts in all these traditional beers that there just hasn't been a lot of research on them and development on them. I think there could be an amazing beer somewhere in there that could actually be for export and take the world by storm. Muratina, the honey wine that I mentioned, which is inspired our Belgian tripel, actually, not only it doesn't need to be refrigerated, it actually goes bad if you put it in the fridge.
All right. You'd have to warn people about that, though.
Well, I know, right? But it's just very interesting, like the microbiology that's going on. It's totally different. So here we are killing to keep the beer cold all over the country, and then you have a traditional beer that literally, can't go in the fridge. It's made for the exact transport system that we have.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There is more interest. I mean, at least maybe it's only a small niche because of the people I'm talking to and that, but there is a lot more interest growing in things like traditional beers like saisons and sour beers and, like you said, yeasts and grains as well. Like, talking to people about heritage grains. So your sorghum beers there probably would be an interest in Europe. And probably the States as well, because you can't get that. But yeah, it probably doesn't make sense to just ship yet another IPA. It's just...
Yeah. No, we wouldn't do that. Right. That'd be the last thing we would do. Yeah.
Larry, we just got another question here. Jack, he wants to know sustainability. That's what is the situation in Kenya? Or is it all in bottles or cans on?
We don't do cans. We made another very bad economic decision, but a very pro-environmental decision. Jack, I'm happy to inform you, the bottles are all recycled. In trade, they're all recycled. And actually, it's interesting. Coca-Cola and Diageo used to have the biggest, most efficient glass recycling system in the world in East Africa. And, no one talked about it as an environmental initiative. Before they moved to cans, the average Tusker bottle was used 25 times, if you can imagine that. So Kenya's always had this infrastructure for recycling glass. And there's all kinds of interesting stories as well, like in the beer wars, in when the South Africans were trying to come in, and the ABL guys would go and smash the empty bottles because, in fact, the business models rely on recycling. And so we set up to rely on recycling economically from the beginning. So when we make a bottle of beer, the biggest cost is tax, then it's glass, then it's liquid.
And how are they?
Distant third. And that's including the fact that we're importing all the raw materials, Right. But our challenge, unfortunately, now is retail, because the supermarkets, since Diageo moved from recycled glass to one-way glass and mostly to cans, the supermarkets immediately stopped and Coca-Cola moved all to plastic.
Okay.
And it's just funny, these big corporations now, they're all talking about the green initiatives and the green this and that. And I'm like, you're talking about this at the same time. You used to sell everything in a country of 50 million people in glass and recycle it 25 times. It's so good. And you're talking about your social initiatives while you move to PET, which is basically impossible to degrade, and recycle. So it's a tragedy. But good news, Jack, is that we are 254 and Bila Shaka, our friends in Bila Shaka these are the only recycled bottles now today in Kenya. So.
All right. Well, then Jack, that's another reason to go search them out now. But yeah, so the whole infrastructure of recycling has just been slowly dismantled.
Well, for us as Nairobi residents, there is much more recycling services now than there was 10 years ago when we came here. So
right.
Like where we live in our neighborhood here, we have a recycling company called Taxation that comes once a week, and they take everything, I think everything except batteries. They sort through it. It all gets recycled. So on that side, that didn't exist before. But on the corporate side, it's the opposite. Like it used to be all recycled glass, and now it's cans for beer and plastic for soda.
What's the average kind of? So do those bottles? Do they come back to you? I guess, or is there an existing system they just go into and you just get new bottles instead of it?
We have from trade, from bars, restaurants, and hotels, we get 100% back. We put an 18 shilling bottle deposit on the bottles, and that is more than enough motivation. And all those bottles come back. But with supermarkets, Chandarana at least does allow recycling. Carrefour prohibits recycling. So there's another big corporate, the big French supermarket chain Carrefour. They prohibit. If you tried to bring your empty bottles back to the supermarket, they will not accept them. We work with another recycling company here called Bottle Logistics, which is collects our bottles from all over the city, and they collect all kinds of waste from all over the city, and they then wash and sanitize and then sell them back to us.
Okay.
So and then even the bottles that we get from trade, they also go to Bottle Logistics and they just sanitize them for us. So we pay them a certain price for the bottles they collect and clean, and then a lower price for the bottles that we collect, and then they just clean them.
Okay, and that somewhere fits into your 18 shilling deposit, roughly.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Okay, we've another question here. We've got loads of questions. Why did you name your? I won't try and pronounce it because I'll pronounce it wrong. Your lager.
Niaje, that's a good question. Well, we had a long story with lager development. I'd say we've made 30 different lagers or different iterations of our lager. We only have one lager. We started off with a lager called Caribou, a hoppy lager, maybe a bit like a Hop House 13, a kind of a thing. It was hoppier than that, but we found that the market actually didn't really resonate with that. Then we ended up releasing an Asian lager, which we called Ni Hao, which we thought we were very clever because in China, where we used to live, an Asian style of lager would use rice, supplement the barley, make it lighter, more crisp kind of thing. So rice is actually indigenous to Kenya, and in Sheng, which is kind of Swahili English lingo, you will say ni hao, meaning like how's it,
Right.
And so we called it Ni Hao. And we thought we were very clever about this. And then we got no end of kind of complaints from differing ends of the political spectrum. And we found that it was too controversial. So we went to 100% malt lager. And then Niaje is a kind of, it's another Shang greeting similar to Ni Hao. And we kind of just went, so the evolution of it was like, we were like Ni Hao with the Asian lager, and then Niaje is just like the pure Kenyan lager, just pure malt. So Niaje means like, what's up?
Okay. It's a long story.
I go way longer, Brian. This is the edited version of me.
Right. So, yeah, I was going to ask, so you started off, you were saying, with the intention purely of distributing the beer, and then you set up the pub just as an afterthought. Has that made a big difference to you in terms of, like, you're producing a beer a week? Do you think you wouldn't have been able to do that if you were just doing distribution?
We would have. Actually, we were doing that anyways, because we originally started with a thing called Beer Club. So we started off, we were just brewing in the back of the house, and we kind of crowdfunded the first round of brewing. We signed up 100 people that paid around $300 for 12 weeks of beer. And so that was our first miniature raise, was $30,000. And we used that to buy some equipment and some bottles and employ a couple of people and everything. And so we were delivering beer to people's homes, and that was when we were developing our flagship brands. We didn't have any recipes or brands at the time, so we were just mostly making IPAs. And we used to put the bottles all had a little tag on the top, like a little rubber band and a kind of a mini Christmas card, and it had a little feedback form inside it. And so people had all prepaid, and you'd get a 6-pack every week, and very raw, very fresh beer. And then people just kind of told us what they liked and didn't like, and we kind of developed the beer on that. And then as we got better at making beer, that was when we started making different styles. And then when Matt came in, he could make anything on earth. And so we were always in that mentality, and Beer Club still goes today. So it was more the timing of things. Kenya is, as I said, the monopoly in the 94%. It's very difficult to get a license. When we got our license, that was the 8th license issued in 100 years. And it took 2 years to do it. And that already nearly killed me. And I thought I was going to be killed by, various players in the market throughout that time. And anyways, we got the license, and it's a long, arduous process. And then we launched the business in February 2020. And so we had one glorious month of bars being open. And at the time, I actually told the sales team, like, no retail. We're just focusing purely on bars. That bars is where it's at. That's where you build a beer brand. And then obviously all the bars shut down. So in the way that the laws and the curfews were in Kenya in 2020, breweries were allowed to be open. So we were allowed to continue manufacturing, and retail outlets were open. We were only able to sell our beers in supermarkets and through like Uber Eats and the equivalent, e-commerce platforms here. And but we could also sell retail at the brewery. So you could come to the brewery and buy a 6-pack, retail. And so there's a car park in front of our brewery, and about 6 months into COVID. October 2020 was when the first ban on bars was lifted here, and then it was subsequently reintroduced. But in October 2020, November, maybe it was the end of October, by then the car park in front of the brewery had already kind of become a bar. On a Friday, the car park was full, and people would come out of their cars and walk up to the brewery and buy like 2 bottles and then go back to their car and sit in their car and drink. And I won't comment on the drinking and driving culture in Kenya and how everybody got home. But anyways, it had kind of became a known spot in our area. We also brew just outside of Nairobi in a town called Kikuyu. And, it's cool to have a brewery there. And so when the bars reopened, and also at that time, we were very desperate for cash and, any kind of way to stay alive. So we just immediately, the day the bars opened, we were like, yes, so before COVID, we hadn't had it, but we had taps in there. We had, some tables and stuff like that, stools and stuff, but we had no bar staff or, servers or bar manager or stock controllers or any of the things that I now know are important features of running a bar. And I was just like telling, everyone just like, now tonight we're all bartenders and, collect cash. And anyways, we've learned a few lessons, but that was kind of how it came. And then it was because of Beer Club that we were in the mentality of just making new beer every week. And then we started putting the new beers out in the bar, and we started getting just much, much better feedback in terms of Beer Club is like, it was about 99% expats, and then the bar at the brewery is about 99% local Kenyan, Kikuyu, Nairobi residents. So then that was started the kind of, I would say, of our beers that the expats kind of drove the IPA development, and Kenyans have driven the other beers, the lager and the Belgian triple, and the other stuff that we've done has been driven by Kenyan consumers. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to take from that a bar license is not a big problem there.
No, very easy. Lots of bars. Yeah, no issue with that.
Yeah. Brewery, but you can sell it, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the opposite to Ireland. So pretty much.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, like you just can't get a license, but breweries I think are pretty easy to set up now, or at least relatively. So it's So you were. Let me go back just a tiny bit, see if I understood this. So you set up, because this crowdfunding thing is interesting. Like, you set it up before. I presume you'd brewed something to give people a bit of a taste as to what they might be getting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it took 2 years. We were, we were brewing very small scale. And the way that the Kenyan law works is that, you're allowed to brew a certain amount as, to test your equipment and to submit samples for, and so it's taking 2 years, but we certainly couldn't sell, outside of the friend network, and we couldn't sell in bars and supermarkets and so on,
Right. But you could just, so you could just sell to people. Okay, we're going to have another, looks like Jack's got another question on your bottles. Are there any plans to extend the 18 shilling deposit currently to, what's this, on beer sold on trade, to beer pushed off trade? I'm not sure I fully understand.
Off trade, he means retail. That's how we talk about it here. Well, Jack, you can be my new head of sustainability. Anyways, we do try, and I can check. We have, so Chandarana. So if you care about sustainability and buying 254 beer, go to Chandarana, because those bottles do have deposits and can get recycled. And then I believe I have to check with the e-commerce ones which ones are recycling, but we'll post it I'll post a summary on Twitter or something next week on that, because it's a good question. I always do like to drive people to the channels. It's in our own economic interest, but Carrefour just flat out refused. Right. We're not the only company trying to lobby them to recycle. The water company. I know other companies are too.
So listen, I've had you for an hour, so I'll let you go soon. But where do you think one, the beer scene in Kenya is going, and then second, I suppose, where are you going? Are you following it or leading it, or where do you think 254? Sorry, before you answer that, where did the name 254 come from?
Well, there's one. If you want a long story, a short story, but 254 is the calling code of Kenya.
Oh, right, okay.
Well, it's like 353 for Ireland. Well, one day we'd had a few beers, and we kind of noticed that, well, the 2 and the 5 makes a bottle. I don't know if you can see that, or if we're in what the 2 and the 5 makes a bottle, and the 4 makes a pint glass. So
all right.
that was us again, thinking that it was meant to be 254 Brewing Co. So, okay. In terms of the market, where it's going and what our role in it is, I think that's probably the best thing about being a small company in a market that is controlled by a monopoly, is that as much as it may be hard to make headway, you'd be amazed how much attention they do pay to what you're doing. And I think that we already have moved the needle in a number of ways, in terms of the way we talk about beer. We always said in the beginning, craft, what language do you use? You call it craft beer, independent beer, this and that. We always talk about fresh beer being, unpasteurized, unfiltered. So probiotic, basically. Now I see all the Tusker, the Diageo draft things all go out saying the freshest beer in Kenya, Now, of course, you could say maybe nothing to do with us, but you notice these things, like you definitely notice the big corporates, the way that they kind of respond and react to you. So how we would like to move the needle is going back to those traditional beers. They are effectively outlawed in Kenya, Brian. Like, I couldn't believe it, and I had no clue until I actually became a brewer. And I started learning more about the traditional beers, but they basically have laws that go back to colonial times on traditional beers. And it actually reminded me of like history books in Ireland when I looked at a Maratina license, which is, so it's licensed and it says that you are, that this product is safe for human consumption. It's a government county license. It's the exact same as my license to make IPAs and lagers. And this traditional brewing license, on the back of it, it says, you cannot brand your product. You cannot sell your product in retail. You cannot sell your product in any a bar, restaurant, or hotel, and you cannot have gatherings at your brewery. Which, there's no logic for that. Only that it's designed by a monopoly to suppress traditional brewers. And so we do try to actually bring that up anytime we're on the media and stuff like that here. We always talk about it. And it's a funny thing because, like, I would say 99 to 100% of Kenyans would agree that it shouldn't be kind of controlled. And then there's a lot of misinformation about the traditional beers. People have been convinced that they make people go blind and kill people and stuff like that, which has never happened. So I would hope, my hope for the development of the craft beer scene in Kenya would be that it would really open up to the diversity of all these traditional drinks, which would be really amazing. And if they were all kind of developed I mean, honestly, I do think export products would come, and I think there'd be, all kinds of interesting things that the outside world would tune into. So that's what we hope. And then for us, we kind of just our aspiration for beer is just to grow it to a big enough size that it's kind of sustainable, and basically gets enough of a foothold in the market. It'd still be very, very tiny. You're talking about maybe getting like 1 to 2% market share out of a country of 50 million people. But yeah, for me, it's to sell the business maybe in 5 years, or to exit in some way, and start some more companies. Would love to do like more high tech manufacturing things, like batteries or semiconductors, or something like that. So I started off life as an electronic engineer,
Right.
so maybe I'll return. But it's really, these days, it's day to day, it's week to week and month to month, and just keeping the wheels on. In 2023, it's turned out to be a much more challenging year than 2020 or 2021, really, economically here. And we kind of expect that to carry on through 2024. And our goal is like to just stay alive to 25. That's it.
Right. Well, yeah, 2 years sounds reasonable.
Yeah, we will. But yeah, so we're not really thinking a whole lot about beyond that. But when we do get there, we have, we'd like to do more fun stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, I'm going to go off in the stream because it sounded like we were finishing up. But the thing about the traditional beers, so if you wanted to brew something that was a traditional beer, you have to get another new license.
Well, that's a good question. I've always kind of, because there is all this stuff around traditional beers, I've never really wanted to co-opt it, and I think it would be very ironic if, after all of this 100 years of suppression of these traditional beers, if a foreigner was the first one to actually make decent money out of them. So I kind of stay out of that arena for that matter, and I more kind of weigh my voice in when it comes up. But I think what we'd be interested in doing would be a kind of fusions of, like, when I was down in South Africa last month, the winner of the African beer cup, like, for out of all the categories, was this kind of barrel aged sour that was thrown in these grape wine barrels, and that's obviously wine country down in Cape Town, and kind of riffing off of the beer and the grapes and those two different worlds. So I think it'd be really fun to just develop new things that take inspiration from those traditional beers, but I don't know if we'd get into making the traditional beers as they are in your state. There's 10,000 brewers here doing it, but they can't make any money off it,
Right. Because they can't sell it.
Or pay tax. They could also be taxpayers,
Yeah.
So,
and something like that, I mean, you would imagine it's a big tourism thing, because it's something that you can't get anywhere else, that people will come.
Yeah, it would. I think it would be huge. Actually, I think it would be huge. So I'd love to see those things be celebrated.
Well, hopefully.
So.
Listen, I'm going to go, because you've been very good in time. Does anybody have any questions now before we finish up? We have a greeting from South Africa. All right, I'm not sure who. And
what's up, South Africa? All right. See, you got 2 new countries on your podcast, anyways, Brian.
Yeah, I think it's the first Kenyan. All right. South Africa have had a POA from down there on before. All right. Oh, 1 second. We do have one more question. Have you any counterfeit issues, considering seemingly it's the second most counterfeited item in Kenya?
Alcohol is, like, if you ask Diageo about that, my God, you'd have amazing counterfeits. It's another great question, Jack. I have not seen that. With my former company, Burn, we had I remember when counterfeits hit the market, and they were unbelievable. They were so realistic. We could barely tell the packaging apart. And they were coming in from China, and then they were going to Somalia and everything. So when you reach a point of counterfeit, you have to take that as a milestone for your company. And we will take it as a great compliment the day that I see fake 254s out in the market, but I have not seen that. We are still pretty small relative to this. But as I'm looking at Jack's comment here, I think the bottles being washed in Kariobangi is the recycling company. You can check that. They're called Bottle Logistics. I would not put it past anyone to, fill a 254 bottle up with some garbage and put a cap on it. You can always check your excise sticker at the top of the bottle, and I think you can scan it to check its authenticity. So I would look for that. For all the tax we do pay, I think that is a fairly decent guarantee of authenticity.
All right. Well, listen, I think that's it. It's been fascinating. I had no idea about Kenya either, so it's a new one to me. And
well, come visit sometime. It's an unbelievable country. We love it here. So, and thanks for the call, Brian. Enjoy the chat a lot, and best of luck with the podcast. Hope you become the next Joe Rogan of Ireland.
That's it. I'll be starting off bringing all the conspiracy people to the front. The beer conspiracy.
Yeah. When you've got beer conspiracy, just bring me back on. I'll tell you all about it.
So where are you going to? Your mother wants to know when you're coming back again.
Is she really?
No.
Hi, Mom. Yeah. I'll chat in a bit. Yeah. All right. Cheers, Brian.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll just finish this. And so thanks again to Owen. It was a great chat, and I really enjoyed it. So hopefully you'll join us again for another chat. Don't know who's next, but hopefully we'll have someone next week. Looking forward to it. Thanks again, Owen. Bye.
All right.